I cannot stress enough the beauty of worship, the beauty of our musical leaders in our church. Let's show some love again for that fantastic expression. This morning, our centering time is coming from the works of Thomas Merton, a renowned theologian and writer. Hear this prayer. O God, in the silence of this moment, I come to you, seeking your presence. Help me to still my heart and mind so that I may hear your voice. Guide my words that they may reflect your truth and love. Fill me with your spirit so that through me, your message may resonate. May my preaching be a vessel of your grace, a means of drawing others closer to you. Let your light shine through my words, bringing hope and transformation to all who listen. In Jesus' name, amen. I would be remiss if I did not take the time to celebrate and acknowledge the fantastic preaching leadership through Alex Stedman and Mark Bogan in the past couple of weeks. Just a reminder, one thing I love about being a part of this community of Lincoln First, I consider ourselves to be a teaching congregation. And one of the roles in the conference that I've had for several years is identifying gifts and skills by way of ordained ministry, and laity, lay leadership as well. And so I think that having Alex, having Mark, having all the different variety of voices in the pulpit really just puts the exclamation point on how a teaching congregation can really help transform leaders. So give yourselves a hand clap for making space. It's not easy to be up here. Oh, it is not easy. So with that said, we are concluding our 12-week journey through the sermon series, Read the Story, and we've been focusing on the profound lesson in First Epistle of Peter. And I don't know about you, but every week I'm exploring different ways that my soul cries out for this nourishment. So I've really enjoyed that first lesson. And then we've been tying in different gospel stories. And so our sermonic focus this morning will be on the Gospel of Mark that was beautifully read by Martha. This morning, I'm inviting us to read the story from the lens of what it means to flip the script. Can you say that phrase with me? Flip the script. Let's get started in this beautiful conversation. So, one of the questions from our Wednesday night Applying the Sermon to Life class, to summarize it, it's a class on Wednesdays that really gets the preacher, whoever is up here, we get an idea of like what the baseline and the temperature of the congregation is, what's on your heart, what's on your mind, what went well with the sermons that were preached, what are you hoping to hear more of, and that's kind of a process called a round table preaching model. So it is a legitimate model. It's a great model where you can raise up new preachers and teachers, but it also holds more senior preachers like myself accountable, and it lets me know like if I'm scratching any of those spiritual happy places. So I'm grateful for the process. So the question that they asked that I think would be great conversation for us this morning, they wanted to know, is flipping the script a confrontational move? Is flipping the script a confrontational move? My immediate answer would be to suggest yes-ish, I-S-H. Flipping the script can be a confrontational move because flipping the script is about challenging the narratives, the assumptions, the power dynamics that shape our interactions, especially in our context of social justice in the work of mercy and love and the pursuit of inclusivity and acceptance for all. So you might already know where I'm going in this sermon, why I suggest yes-ish to whether or not this is a confrontational move It's because it really depends on the person, the listener. For those who may be satisfied with the narratives that support the status quo and power dynamics as they are, then yes, flipping the script will feel very confrontational. Can I get an amen? Y'all gonna be with me this morning? I don't want y'all to be mad at me. We're gonna be friends after this, right? But on the contrary, for those who are embodying this first lesson of 1 Peter 2, crying out for nourishment, or let's play around with that word again, crying out for justice, for those crying out for mercy, for those crying out for healing, for those crying out for repair, for those crying out for reconciliation, now that they've had a taste of the Lord's kindness, dare I suggest that the act of flipping the script would be a liberating move. This point of the conversation reminds me of the book, Who Moved My Cheese? Who moved my cheese? Y'all want to say that with me? Who moved my cheese? Author is Spencer Johnson. This book, if you've read it, how many of y'all read it or you heard of it? Oh, it's a good book, isn't it? Powerful allegory about change, adaptability, and the overall human response to shifting circumstances. Because the aha moment is, I don't care how mundane or routine our daily lives are, there is always shifting circumstances. Whether the bird was in the tree across the street and then decided to fly tomorrow over the other tree, right? That is a shifting circumstance. The crickets may not be cricketing in the same spot. The squirrels may not be squirreling around in the same tree. Always shifting circumstances. Who Moved My Cheese is a story that revolves around two mice and two tiny people navigating a maze, searching for cheese. Who moved my cheese? This cheese is a metaphor for what we might desire in life. I'm still in the story. When their cheese is moved, they each respond differently. Some quickly adapt, while others resist and struggle with the change. When viewed through the lens of flipping the script, who moved my cheese, runk, y'all like that, offers valuable insights into why flipping the script can feel confrontational. In the book, the characters who struggle with the change initially feel anger and confusion. They are uncomfortable, even resentful, because the familiar narrative, their script of how life should work, has been upended. Flipping the script, like moving the cheese, challenges, in my mind, assumptions about stability, about security, and control. It forces us to re-examine what we really expect from life, from our relationships, and from society, often disrupting our comfort zone. And I'm about to crack a powerful code, I think. All of us are disrupted in this comfort zone, not just some of us, but all of us are in this uncomfortable tension. The confrontation that arises then from flipping the script doesn't necessarily come from the act itself, but simply from the resistance to change. And the same way that him, one of the characters in the book, stubbornly waits for the cheese to come back. Come back, cheese, come back. People often resist when the familiar narrative is challenged as well. Whether in our personal life, social justice issues, or our everyday actions and interactions, flipping the script pushes us into unfamiliar territory. It questions deeply held beliefs and forces us to navigate uncertainty, which can feel disorienting, and even threatening. So with that said, this is where I'm coming from as I approach our gospel story this morning. Let's see whose metaphorical cheese is being moved in the gospel and how flipping this script occurs within our story. So if you walk with me in Mark 9:30 through 37, we encounter in my imagination a powerful moment where Jesus flips the script on his disciples and challenges their understanding of greatness and power. You know, this passage describes Jesus, if you walk with me, predicting his death for the second time. And instead of the disciples like crying at that revelation of hearing it the second time, or grieving it, or, just really being with Jesus in that really hard moment, the text tells us that the disciples started arguing amongst themselves about who is the greatest. Jesus is saying he's getting ready to die, but they're worried about who's the greatest? That's odd. But Jesus, nevertheless, responds by teaching them and this interaction that true greatness comes through humility and service. Then the shocking mic drop moment of this whole pericope comes where he says, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. That's hard. The Gospel of Mark, just giving some historical background, it was written around 65 to 70 Common Era, and it's traditionally attributed to the writer John Mark, a companion of Peter. John Mark is named in the Act of the Apostles as an assistant accompanying Paul and Barnabas on their missionary journeys. Now, traditionally, he is regarded as identical with Mark the evangelist, the traditional writer of the Gospel of Mark. Either way, as a theologian, aspiring theologian, I really like Mark because it is considered one of the earliest of the four Gospels. So the other three Gospels will often be compared to Mark. And it was written primarily for a Roman audience of early Christians. But what I love about the Bible as well is even though that was the intended audience, we can see how over 2,000 years later, perhaps we are the intending audience as well, because the similarities are uncanny. These Christians were living in a time of persecution, likely under Emperor Nero, and the gospel is offering encouragement for them to endure suffering as part of their discipleship. That's hard. Suffering a part of with the discipleship. So there's no comfort there. Mark's gospel is characterized by urgency and presents Jesus as the suffering servant, one who calls his followers not to seek power and prestige, but to embrace servanthood and suffering. In this passage, Jesus flips the script then on societal expectations of greatness, especially in the context of the Roman world where power and dominance were highly valued. So the disciples' discussion about greatness reflects their human desire for recognition and status. And I think if we're honest, where two or three are gathered, Christ is present. But I also notice where two or three are gathered, this competition comes out really quickly as well. This recognition and status and this drive for power and to be on top. And so the disciples were no different then than perhaps we are now. So what a shocking message that must have been to hear from Jesus when he teaches that true honor comes through humility and serving others, particularly those whom society overlooks. And he puts the exclamation point on who society overlooks by bringing a child into the midst. It was really cool earlier service because I couldn't have paid this baby to be a better actor than what he was, but I swear this baby, Arison, and that's the son of Aiden and Marissa. It was like when we were preaching about the child earlier this morning, he was really engaged with the pulpit and myself with worship. It was almost like his ears were listening to this idea that the child is welcome. You know, why this is such a flip the script moment for Jesus by way of understanding their role in power and success is that he really wanted to symbolize that really how all of our faith should be is like a child, childlike and humble. And traditionally in the culture, children were still kind of seen, unfortunately, how some of our society treats children kind of to this day, seen and not heard. So that dynamic was there as well. So this child was just a powerful flip the script all on his own. Jesus in this story turns the disciples' worldly notions of hierarchy upside down through this child and more. And this is reminiscent of the central theme in Who Moved My Cheese? It's this idea when what you expect is taken away, then there's an invitation for us all to adjust, adapt, and embrace to a new paradigm. For me, that is what is going to make the church remain alive, is the churches that understand how to adapt to the ever-changing times of the world. You know, this was not said in the first service, but I wanted to preach a little bit about what I noticed about the Lincoln Children's Zoo that my husband works at. This will be like my fourth zoo story. I promise I'll keep it balanced, right? But do you know that if the zoo were to remain open based off of ticket sales alone, it would have closed a long time ago? Adaptability. Now there is this movement where the Lincoln Children's Zoo, he is gone more working at the zoo in all of their events than he was in the restaurant business. There's this new wave where people want to get married at the zoo. They want to have parties at the zoo. They want to do everything at the zoo after 5 o'clock. That's when it really gets lit up in the zoo. The animals are in the background, and that is how they found ways to generate more income. They were willing to move into uncharted territories, realizing that zoo ticket sales just isn't going to cut it alone. So his team is just committed to finding new ways to bring in community and do life with them. What a perfect model for our church. I've never said this before, but in my mind, the church vision is more like the community center focused and minded, where 7 days a week, we are open and doing life together with people. The marker of measuring success by who shows up on Sunday morning does not paint a comprehensive picture about how the life of the church is really doing. That is why every week in your worship bulletin, we highlight all of the people that we are in ministry with week by week. And even on our slower weeks, even though it may not look as full as it does on Sunday morning, I tell you, we at least minister to 200 plus people during the week. I think that's a hand clap of praise by way of Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, maternal wellness. We have to be that community center focused and minded. So when people look around on Sunday morning, and if Sunday morning is really your only context for how successful the church is going to be, I don't care what church you walk into, it's not going to look very successful. But using that zoo model, where my leadership is headed is figuring out how we can get beyond the metaphorical ticket sales that is just not going to cut it. It's finding ways to do life with people Monday through Sunday. If you're excited about the dare to leap into that new reality, can you give God a hand clap of praise? I mean, I'm just saying, Other organizations of nonprofits are doing it, so the church should do it too. So the disciples, though, we're back in the story. If we're focused on who moved our cheese, I don't think we're going to get where we need to get as a church. But this is an important conversation because the disciples, much like the characters in the book, find their assumptions challenged. And I think people who get stuck on where their cheese is, they'll find their assumptions are challenged all the time. Because life isn't like set up that way where your cheese is just supposed to just be where you expect it to be. I wish it was that way, but it just isn't that way. In this story, the disciples and the people in the book, they're struggling with the idea that true greatness doesn't come from being first in line or where your cheese is, but by serving those who are last and vulnerable. And the metaphor again of the child in Jesus is teaching us just a particularly powerful importance of seeing those who may not be able to see or speak for themselves. And this is why another thing that I will say is in our church, you might notice that our children are taking an active role in ushering. We want to train them with technology in the back of the house. We've had children doing actual newsletter stories. Our kids are wanting to make a difference. So my thought is if we're going to say the kids are our future, but we don't let them do anything, we don't let them participate in anything, we don't think that is, I guess, holy enough for them to be an usher, or we think that an adult should do it over a child, but their heart is ready and they're willing and they take their job seriously, then what are we doing here? So I think we should celebrate our children for stepping up in ways that sometimes adults just can't or won't. Just as Who Moved My Cheese, church, illustrates how difficult change can be and how people often resist it, I guess what I'm asking us to consider is that Mark's passage shows the disciples wrestling with their own version of change, how to adapt in this new layer of leadership and authority. You know, flipping the script both in life and in scripture is often, I'll say it again, uncomfortable because it challenges the status quo and it forces us to relinquish our attachments to control and comfort. And then in Who Moved My Cheese, the characters who fail to adapt like him, let me say it another way, the churches who fail to adapt like him suffer because they cling to their old narrative. And similarly in Mark, the disciples' fixation on their own notions of greatness could prevent them from embracing the kingdom values Jesus is teaching them. The challenge to become last confronts them all with a choice. And it's a choice that I leave us to keep pondering over as a church. Will they cling to their old understanding of power, or will they embrace the servant leadership that Jesus models? Tough conversation. I tried to make it as easy to the ears as possible, but this is difficult stuff. So I raised the $1 million question then this morning. Is flipping the script necessary? Is flipping the script necessary? I think y'all know what I'm gonna say, right? Yes. Church family, can you imagine what sections of society would suffer if we did not dare to flip the script? Consider the civil rights movement. If people had not dared to flip the script on segregation and institutionalized racism, African Americans such as myself would still be living under laws that denies our basic humanity. The courage to confront and rewrite the narrative of racial inequality is what led to dismantling Jim Crow laws, securing voting rights, and advancing racial justice. Yet even today, when you and I refuse to flip the script on systemic racism, Black communities and other communities that look like me continue to suffer from disproportionate rates of incarceration, police violence, economic inequality, and the list goes on. Similarly, imagine if no one ever flipped the script on gender equality. Women would still be denied the right to vote. Some of us would not be really in church today. Women would be denied the opportunity to pursue their careers or make decisions about their own bodies. Yes, I'm gonna say it. I have had 2 babies coming out of my body. For me, I would like the choice to be able to decide for my body and then leave up all of the theological considerations between me and Jesus, because it is my business and my body, and that's how I feel, okay? And the worst thing about the women empowerment piece is that still women in leadership, I'm gonna hold us women accountable. The hardest client I've had to date to please is another woman mainly. Women tearing down women, and we are actually contributing to the overall problem. And this whole woman girl hate not being a girlfriend, it happens, I think, before they can even speak, and they're like pre-K. It's just this tension between women. Am I pretty enough? Is she smarter than me? Does she have a higher standing? I don't want to respect her leadership. She doesn't want to respect my leadership. All of the catty fights and the pettiness. Women in particular, I'm not saying men are exempt, but we have to do better about lifting up other women. Let's be a part of the solution and not the problem. I came to preach this morning. When we neglect to challenge the structures that perpetuate sexism, women, especially those in marginalized communities, suffer the most. Y'all all right? I got one more point. Our own member, Lena Boswick, on behalf of the Nebraska Nurses Association, gave me permission to share some of her work. But she's flipping the script by doing some powerful advocacy work at the capital level around how we approach adolescent dysphoria, particularly the impact this has on our LGBTQ plus youth. These young people face higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide is like tripled in this category due to the lack of support, misunderstanding, fear, and the stigmatization of their overall experience. Refusing, church, to challenge the prevailing narrative on gender identity means that schools and healthcare systems and families remain unequipped to provide the compassionate and affirming care that these young people desperately needed like yesterday. By flipping the script, we challenge rigid notions of gender. We push for inclusive policies and advocate for mental health resources, gender-affirming care, and supportive environments for young people dealing with dysphoria, because it's here. It's now. When we fail to do this, it's the adolescents already vulnerable and often voiceless who are left to suffer in silence, bearing the weight of society's resistance to change. I did get some helpful feedback at our table talk that one of the new members who hopefully will be attending this afternoon, he said that he was pleasantly surprised to hear a church even venture into a topic like this adolescent dysphoria, let alone have the nerve to preach about it. But if we don't start having these tough conversations, if we don't start to educate ourselves about what's really going on, then the problem remains aggressively high, where our kids are silenced because they don't know who they can come and talk to. Bottom line, church family, at its core, flipping the script invites us to see people, to see situations, maybe to see our families too for the very first time, and to see systems in new ways that align more closely with God's vision of justice, mercy, and love. In our everyday interactions, flipping the script could be as simple as choosing compassion when the world expects apathy, or advocating for the voiceless, when silence would be much easier. It's the moment we decide to listen to the marginalized instead of centering those already in power. One of our students at Table Talk said he has had a blessed life, but he realized being blessed means he has to be blessed to be a blessing. It's kind of another way of letting me know, for those already perhaps maybe centered in power, I realize they're going to be all right if things are distributed a little more fairly. Flipping the script to me means exposing the hidden inequities that many choose to ignore or refuse to accept, simply resigning to a mentality that this is just the way things are. Church family, when we confront injustice in this way, we are inviting a deeper healing for individuals and communities. And I don't know about you, but could anyone use a healing? A healing in our stress levels, a healing in our minds, a healing in our bodies, a healing in our families. I see you shaking your head. A healing in our workplaces, a healing in our relationships. That's what happens when we dare to flip the script. Because for me, the biggest revelation that I leave for us all to consider is that the script should be flipped when the current narrative denies dignity, equality, or the fullness of life for any person or any group. I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of just groups every day being terrorized, isolated, marginalized, brutalized. You know, it's not enough to notice these injustices from a distance. I don't think we have that privilege anymore in 2024. When you and I are faced with systems or stories that keep people marginalized or oppressed, I believe as a church, we have a responsibility to act, to step in and rewrite those narratives. Who moved my cheese? This I may not know, but I'm so glad that they did. Because in that movement and that disruption, we find the opportunity for growth, for justice, and for the full transformation and all of its infinite possibilities that God will continue to call us to. Thanks for listening.